Hello and welcome to Center Ice Cardcast, your one-stop podcast shop for all things hockey cards. My name is Eric Andrews, also known in the hobby as Hammerhawk, and I'm joined by my co-host and fellow hobbyist Aaron Goldstein, better known as Crease Collector. On a bit of a different note, it's only right to start this episode tonight by talking about the results of the NHL Draft Lottery, which took place on Friday night. For those of you who haven't heard, it was interesting to say the least. The format of the draft lottery this year was different than in past years, as obviously the season being cut short really impacted the fairness of how they would conduct it in the normal fashion. So there were some changes as far as the draft lottery, and it in a way reared its ugly head as pretty much one of the craziest outcomes could have happened. So coming into the draft lottery, Detroit had the best odds for the first overall pick and ended up falling all the way to fourth overall, which is the worst outcome for the Red Wings. Ottawa had the second and third best odds and fell to third and fifth overall. Los Angeles started at fourth and moved up to second. And then to finish off the night, one of the placeholder spots ended up winning the lottery with only a 2.5% chance. So that first overall
That
pick,
is nuts.
it was crazy. The first overall pick will be randomized between the 8 teams that lose in the play-in round once play resumes. And each of those 8 losing teams will have equal odds at winning the first overall pick, meaning that they'll have a 1 in 8 chance or a 12.5% chance. And of course, some people might ask the question of, well, what happens if the play-in round and the playoffs don't actually happen and the season is actually canceled? Well, if that happens, then the lowest 8 teams in the regular season standings, which would be 4 per each conference, will comprise that field of 8 teams for the first overall pick lottery.
That's a lot. That's a lot to just kind of unpack. First of all, I just feel really bad for any Detroit Red Wings fans out there. I just feel so sorry for you. I'm a Leafs fan, but man, that's a tough pill to swallow for any Detroit fans or any Detroit collectors out there, from falling that far. I know it's first over or fourth overall, but still, considering you probably should have got first, that's tough. That's really, really tough.
Yeah, I think a lot of Red Wings fans really were hoping that would be the redeeming quality of this season.
Right? Like getting, 22 wins or something? And, oh, man.
So, not meant to be.
No, definitely not.
But,
I feel so bad.
yeah, is what it is. I'm a Blackhawks fan, so I don't feel too bad for him. But
Well, yeah, hey.
Speaking of which, the Blackhawks do have a chance at landing the first overall pick, which I would be all for.
See, that's great, but I really want the Maple Leafs to come out on top. Or actually, we were talking about this before, but just it would be really cool to see Montreal get it. Again, as a Leafs fan, it's tough to say, the Habs winning this lottery, but just for the impact on the hobby, which I think we especially tend to think about when it comes to the draft lottery and the cards coming up next year, I definitely think it's going to be a big deal for a lot of fans out there, especially Canadian fans.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where Lafreniere ends up because based on how this has unfolded so far, he could end up going somewhere like Arizona. He could go somewhere like Florida, Minnesota, Nashville, somewhere where the collecting market is not super strong. And that would definitely affect the values of his cards next year. Where on the flip side, like we said, he also could go to a Toronto, an Edmonton, a Pittsburgh, a Montreal. And
that would be nuts.
If he goes to one of those teams, especially Montreal,
Man.
I cannot even imagine the values of his cards next year.
Can you imagine his Young Guns or his High Gloss or just the RPA? Man, seeing Lafreniere in a Habs uniform on a card would just be mind-blowing, and it would be fantastic for the hobby. So as a Leafs fan, I honestly hope he goes to the Habs. I really do, just for this hobby. that I really love. Just cards in general has seen a huge boost recently. I think this would be, as far as the hockey market goes, just a great, like another additional boost. A French Canadian player going to Montreal, first overall pick. That would be incredible for the hobby. Incredible.
Agreed. It's also kind of ironic if that were to happen, because obviously the draft this year was supposed to be held in Montreal. Just imagine if that had all unfolded and the draft was actually held in Montreal.
That would be nuts.
Fans would be going crazy. The Bell Center.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, it'll definitely be interesting just to see really how, not only how it affects the teams and things like that, but really as far as the hobby. I mean, it could affect it in so many ways just based on who ends up getting that first overall pick.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where he ends up, especially like the draft lottery is huge for the hobby, but just this year, especially with everything going on and things being cut short and the odds being so long, just seeing a playoff team being in contention for a spot like this is really cool. And just seeing where he ends up is going to be very entertaining.
Yeah. And of course, we're also kind of just assuming that he'll go first overall. He might not, but I think
he might not. It's possible.
Most people would probably say that he is a pretty safe bet to go first, but there are people that, have argued for a Quentin Byfield or even a Tim Stützle. Yep. So we'll see. I mean, but I think it really is probably a pretty safe bet that he'll go first. But even if he goes second, he's going to a big market in Los Angeles too. So
either way, it's going to be interesting to see what unfolds.
Yes. Enough hockey talk. Let's get into the cards, which is what we're about. As we mentioned in the last episode, another huge card in the hobby was recently auctioned off. Aaron, do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Oh, definitely. For those who didn't hear our last podcast, we just quickly covered the Sidney Crosby 0506 Cup RPA, numbered out of 99, of course, that was graded a BGS 10 pristine. It's the only Crosby that's ever been graded that high for that RPA. And it's a one color, but still a very impressive card. A game use patch, of course. Just ended this past Thursday, June 25th, for an incredible $125,000, which is equivalent to, for us Canadians, 171K Canadian. So that's just crazy. Though the 56 bidders involved for that final price, it does not include the taxes paid by the buyer, so definitely a big chunk of coin there for the Crosby. The interesting thing is, for this auction, it was kind of, which kind of surprised me, it was kind of like on the low end of things. Like, it was hovering around 60K, which I know isn't low, but for the Crosby of that magnitude, it is kind of low. I was hovering around 60K for about the entire last couple of days, and then within the final 10 seconds, it raised over $50,000 to the final price in the final few seconds. So just to see a card like that, of that magnitude, jump so high in the past, in the last couple seconds, was really entertaining to watch. It really was.
Yeah, I fortunately, I knew it was ending that night, and I just so happened to jump onto my eBay app literally with 1 minute left. So, and
get the popcorn ready.
That wasn't planned. I didn't have a notification or a timer or anything. I just happened to look, and there it was. So, yeah, like you said, I got the proverbial popcorn out and enjoyed watching as the seconds ticked off and the dollars racked up. It was really something. I think when I started watching with a minute left, I think it was at 60,400 US, and then I don't know how long after that it jumped up to 60,700. And then I'm not exactly sure, but under 10 seconds, it jumped up around 75,000. And then in the time that it took to go from 1 second to being over, it jumped up to over 125,000. So
that is insane.
Yeah, it was cool to watch. It was cool to watch.
Wow. That card is definitely going to be talked about for a long time. And who knows? But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if eventually in a couple of years it comes up for sale again.
Yeah, especially, and we were talking about this earlier this week, Aaron, but when you look at, the value of a card like this, obviously that's a lot of money to be paying out for any hockey card. But if you look at it from an investment standpoint, which we'll get into this a little bit more in the episode, but it's almost, I would consider it almost kind of a safe investment just because, Crosby is such a well-established player, and,
Absolutely.
a lot of people could probably make an argument that by the time he hangs up his skates, he could be a top 10 or even a top 5 player of all time. Once he retires and gets into the Hall of Fame, I mean, that card could go up substantially in value again.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's going to be one of those staple cards like a Gretzky or like a Honus Wagner, if anyone follows baseball, that just continues to come up for sale periodically and continues to pass the previous price as the year go by. So for this Crosby, if it pops up in another 5 or 10 years, if other pristine 10s don't start popping up out of nowhere, this card's definitely going to be one that is talked about for a while, and it's definitely going to keep passing that 125 threshold for years to come, I think. Just going to be a true investment, I think, in the hobby for those big players who can afford it, obviously.
Absolutely.
So just speaking with just the investment talk, the main portion of the episode here, we just want to start by saying this topic was just brought on by a question by one of our listeners, Hayden. He just asked, he just wanted us to touch on any prospects or young players to invest in, and who and how to determine to invest in these cards. Well, Hayden, thank you so much for the question. We really appreciate it. We will definitely take this topic to heart, as it is such a big topic in the hobby, whether you like it or not. Anytime there's money involved, the investment question or the investment talk definitely is warranted. So I just want to first start off by saying with any investments, especially with cards, if you go into this hobby or any hobby with the idea to make money, like I would say, just first off, take a step or two back first, because I think it's really hard to go into a hobby with a strictly I'm going to make money on this attitude, because it gets very, very difficult, and things with sports cards can change in an instant, especially with hockey, as it's already not the top of the 4 major sports. It's near the bottom, so it's very, very difficult to do that. But if you are interested in investing in hockey, the main takeaways I would say would be to start looking up some vintage cards. I think that's where you're going to get the true investment pieces, and it's definitely going to be something that you can buy tomorrow and sell in a year, and at the very least break even, because these cards have been around for decades and continue to be sought after, and there definitely is still a market with them. Cards like the original 1910 to 1912 Imperial Tobacco cards. Those cards were, to our knowledge, the first ever hockey cards ever made, and they were included in cigarette packs for those who don't know, and they're very, very sought after still. And again, these are cards that, while they are expensive, the buy-ins are not cheap for some of these cards, especially if you get them graded fairly high. The buy-in isn't cheap, but it's something that you can definitely hang on to for another year or two, and at the very least break even with these cards. So it's definitely a great investment. And then if you move up the chain, if you go to the post-war stuff like the 50s, those are always a pretty safe bet, depending on the condition. And then, of course, you got the big boys like the Lemieux, the Patrick Roys, and, of course, the Wayne Gretzky. Those cards are going to be ones that you can definitely, especially right now with the cards kind of booming, now is probably your best bet to buy a Gretzky card. Reason being is because they have seen a spike in price, and I'm not sure if you're a starter investor within the hobby, if you can kind of buy into these for very long, because they are kind of increasing in price so fast. So I definitely think if you want to invest in sort of like the newer, I guess you could say, vintage cards, I think now is the right time to buy, because they're definitely seeing a spike now, and who knows if the bubble is going to burst or not. But it's definitely a safe bet for those key Hall of Famers, the Patrick Roys, Lemieux, Gretzky. And I'm sure there's a couple other names that I'm missing. Or if you want to go way back to the pre-war cards, like anything before the 40s or before the First World War. Those things are very sought after as well, and they definitely have a very stable market. So that would be in terms of the vintage cards. Some things to think about if you're looking to invest in hockey cards.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Aaron. And there's kind of a couple of ways to look at it. I mean, and I think this first one almost in a way kind of more goes with the vintage as far as getting a card that you want to hold on to and enjoy, but knowing that you're not going to lose money on it. I think for the most part, at this point, the overwhelming majority of vintage cards are pretty well established in their value. You do see the price spikes, like how the Gretzky rookie has gone up a lot in the last few months, but generally speaking, that really doesn't happen too often. I mean, you'll see some gradual appreciation over the years for some bigger cards like that, but a lot of more common vintage cards really do just hold their value really well. I mean, it's not like you're going to go buy a C55 card from 11-12 and drop $500 on a nicely graded copy, and then a few years down the road you'd only sell it for $100. Like that won't happen.
No way.
You're always going to get your money out of that card. So if you're looking at it from the standpoint of, hey, I want to invest money in a card and really enjoy it, but also know that I can always get my money back out of it and maybe even make some money off of it down the road, I think vintage is absolutely the way to go with that.
Absolutely.
If you do have the money to invest in those big cards like Aaron was talking about, whether that be a pre-war card like the Vezina rookie card or a Cyclone Taylor rookie card or anything like that, or if you move into the post-war stuff and you get into, Gordie Howe rookie card and Bobby Orr rookie card and
Terry Sawchuk,
all those guys, Maurice Richard, Jean Beliveau, Jacques Plante, all those guys, in the 50s and even getting into the 60s with guys like Orr. And then fast forwarding to the 70s and 80s with Gretzky and Lemieux and Waugh, those cards I think will continue to go up in value over time. Obviously, it is more of an investment up front because you're having to spend that money. But again, those cards just probably are never going to go down in value. I mean, it's hard to see them going down in value. Maybe the Gretzky bubble pops and they do go down a little bit, but it's not like they're going to drop 50% or anything either.
No, they're here to stay.
Yeah. So I think from that standpoint, vintage is definitely the way to go. And then if you're looking as far as buying in on something, quote unquote low, and then hoping for a huge payday down the line, that's where you're going to get more into the modern stuff and really more so pretty much the brand new stuff. And getting to your original question, Hayden, a lot of that does come down to prospects and young players. So obviously you can take your high-end prospects breaking into the league, guys like an Austin Matthews, a Connor McDavid, players like that where you say, okay, yeah, these are pretty much a surefire bet that they're going to be great players and have really successful careers and that they'll be pretty valuable throughout their career and onward. Obviously, players of that caliber in this day and age do take a lot of money to invest in. I mean, I'm pretty sure that when the McDavid Young Gun came out, it could be had for $150 or $200. So based on that, my guess is that a Beckett 9.5 copy of that McDavid Young Gun could probably be had for $200 or maybe a little bit more at around the time of release. Whereas now a McDavid 9.5 is what, $500-$600. So
yeah, that's a lot.
You are seeing, even just in 5 years or so, that McDavid stuff is continuing to go up in value. We're seeing the same with Matthews, probably not quite to the same extent, and it does matter a little bit more so with the actual card with him. But I do think that his value is still definitely going to go up. I think even if the regular season had finished this year, I think he probably would have hit the 50 goal plateau, and his stuff would have seen a big increase in price. And obviously, being in Toronto, if the Maple Leafs ever break their drought, his stuff is going to skyrocket.
Even if they win a round, I just think just all that hype, I think you can see a spike in his young guns, or the RPA if the Leafs win a round. Mark my words, his stuff's going up for sure. And then, of course, if they win a cup, it would just be bananas.
Yeah. So I personally, I think out of the two of us, I do a little bit more investing than Aaron does. One of my strategies, kind of to touch a little bit on one of the other questions you had, Hayden, was how to pick who and how to determine, what to invest in. I think one of the safest bets at this point, in this day and age with young players, is always going to be to go after their, quote unquote, staple rookie cards. So things like the Young Guns rookie card, the SP Authentic Future Watch autograph, obviously the Cup RPA, if you can afford that, depending on the player. I think one that does get a good amount of attention, but I think are still a little undervalued, are the Ice Premier's rookie cards, especially if they're the ones numbered out in 99. I think for me, those are probably the big four, in my opinion. People would also throw the exquisite RPAs in there as well. Their jersey numbered out of the player's number. Those can command huge money, not only for the top player, the big name guys, but also just if they're limited cards. I'll share a story about that. One investment that I made last year was I found an Alex DeBrincat exquisite RPA numbered out of 12, which, for that set is pretty rare. And with DeBrincat being one of the better rookies from that class, he has really strong value. And I was able to find one for a really good deal, and I ended up flipping it probably, I don't know, maybe a couple months later for about 4 times what I paid for it. Obviously, I got a really good deal on it up front, but part of that is also kind of just knowing what to look for and know what has that value and what has the potential to sell for bigger money down the line. And a lot of the investment aspect of it really comes down to the risk reward factor. How much risk are you willing to take? If you're really wanting to, try for a big payoff, then I would say it's probably actually even better to try to go after some of those more second tier type of guys that you think have that potential to really break out and become superstars. I think the two names that really come to mind in that type of an investment light in recent memory would be Leon Draisaitl and David Pastrnak, who both of which were rookies in 14-15, and over the last year or two, their stuff has just exploded, out of control. But I think that's really where, that risk reward factor can really pay off for you, is when you go after those second tier type of players and they do end up reaching their potential and become those superstar level players. Guys like Draisaitl and Pastrnak, like I said, when those cards first came out, my guess is you could have had those young guns raw for probably $25-$30 each, if that, probably even less. And obviously now look at them. I mean, they're huge cards in the hobby. So
yeah, I think it definitely it's I think we all have those stories, and it's hard to see where these cards are going to go, but for all the Pasternaks out there and the Draisaitl's, there's tons of guys who definitely tank in value. So it's really hard to predict. But I think another point that I just wanted to bring up quickly is just also if you're thinking to invest in hockey cards, definitely pay attention to the sport itself and just really ask questions and just see what sells and what doesn't in the hobby primarily. Traditionally, centers and maybe paired up with a good winger do sell well, and same thing with the goalies. And another thing, Eric, that we were just talking about earlier, just how defensemen traditionally don't sell well, and if they do, they're eventually going to drop off fairly quickly, which is unfortunate. And it's it's good to have those second tier players in mind, but you still have to try and keep in mind of you're still in this hobby, and you still got to know just by experience what works and what doesn't work in the hobby. So I think there definitely is a combination of two things there. It's kind of knowing to kind of go after that somewhat of a long shot player, if you want to invest that way, and then see if you can get in on the bottom floor. But you still got to know what traditionally sells in the sport itself of hockey, and seeing where you can go with that before you start investing your hard-earned money on these cards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you mentioned there with the positional aspect of it really is important. You look at this year's rookie class that, arguably two of the top rookies, if not the top two rookies, are defensemen in Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes. Taking absolutely nothing away from either player, they are both exceptional hockey players that will have extremely successful careers on the ice. But in terms of hobby value long term, I don't think that the values that we're seeing with their stuff, especially at release time of each product, is sustainable long term. Oftentimes, cards do go down in value the longer that they've been out. That is true for the majority of cards. And on the flip side, there are cards that definitely do go up in value quite a bit, of bigger name players and guys that break out later in their careers and stuff like that, like we talked about. But when you look at especially defensemen, it's a really risky endeavor if you're seriously going to be investing in their stuff, just because the likelihood that the values of their cards long term will hold up to what they are valued at the time of release is very, very slim. Even guys like legends of the game like Ray Bourque and Nick Lidstrom, their stuff is only worth so much money. A Ray Bourque rookie card isn't just going to randomly jump up to be worth $1,000 or anything like that. Even more, guys that are still playing today, like an Erik Karlsson or Brent Burns or guys like that, while they have had their times where their cards, they go up a lot in value, they actually still have kind of come back down to earth in recent years. And, so if you were investing in those guys, especially Burns, if you were investing in him at the beginning of his career, yeah, you probably have done pretty well on his stuff. But that's also kind of almost a one-off in a way. And that's really not even a super fair comparison because he started as a winger in the NHL. But anyway, basically, for any defenseman to actually be a worthwhile investment, if you're buying their stuff at the time of release, we were joking before we started recording, that defenseman almost has to turn into Bobby Orr for it to be a worthwhile investment.
Exactly.
So, yeah, the position really does matter. Goalies can be risky, but, if they do end up becoming a Hall of Fame caliber type of goalie, or even just a franchise icon type of goalie, someone like a Carey Price or something,
or Jordan Binnington.
That's the ultimate goalie investment right there.
Yeah, I mean, his stuff was selling for stupid money, but I think eventually his stuff will come back down to earth.
It has a little bit.
If it hasn't already, exactly. Yeah, you see jumps like that periodically with a big year, but again, we're trying to address the short term, but also be realistic in the long-term value of these players. Binnington, for those who don't know, was a very cheap buy. He wasn't expected to do what he did with the Blues. And so he was a cheap buy for those, collectors looking at his cards. I'm not sure if anyone would be out there to say that they invested in Jordan Binnington, but his stuff did explode, obviously, with his run with the Blues. That kind of came out of nowhere. So you do get, again, periodic spikes like that where, a guy will have a big year. But again, traditionally, his stuff is is not really sustainable long term. So I think getting back to defensemen or traditional stuff, if you're holding on to Makar cards, I think, we're not experts by any means, but I think it would be definitely a good time to sell. One, because these fresh new hits in, for example, SBA are hot, and being in a new product, and just the fact that you can make as much money as possible right now on these big cards of his. But traditionally, long term, again, I don't see his cards commanding what they do today. I'm not saying they're going to fall off a cliff, in one game or the other, but I think eventually, if you look at another 5 years, or throughout his career, I don't see it being sustainable right now. So a big part of investing is also knowing when to sell, because I think knowing who to buy and when to buy is very important. And I think knowing when to sell is important too, and knowing the right time to get out. If you're holding on to some Makar stuff, if you do want to wait a while, I think the window hasn't completely closed. Obviously, with the playoffs coming up and the start of the next season, whenever that is, I do think there is room for a little bit of growth if he starts off insanely hot. Other than that, definitely selling now, or at least in the near future, would be wise on his cards, being a defenseman and all. And this has nothing to do with the player at all. I think he's a fantastic athlete, a fantastic hockey player, and a great defenseman. It's nothing against him personally. It's just traditionally what we've seen in this hobby, collecting cards over the years.
Yeah, and I was going to talk on it if you didn't. The timing of investing is everything. You look at even a card like the Sidney Crosby Young Gun, for example. That card was pretty well established for years, and then a few years ago, it just completely took off. Same with the Ovechkin Young Gun and all of their rookie year cards, really. And the Ovechkin spike was kind of more expected. If you win the Stanley Cup finally, your stuff is going to probably go up.
And he was due for one.
Yeah. So I think that was pretty expected. And the build up to that, especially in his case, was just so long, and
it was heartbreaking at times, but he got there.
The anticipation of it was there building for so long that when it finally happened, his stuff just exploded and hasn't looked back, especially now that he's potentially going to close in on Gretzky's all-time goal record. I don't see his stuff ever going down at this point. It's only going to go up. And another thing on the timing, and this isn't only important just with investing, but also just selling in general. I've had cards that I had in my collection that I never really intended to sell, that I just said, I can't afford to keep this card anymore because it's not worth to me what the market value is right now. So for example, I really like Dominic Kubalik on the Blackhawks. I think he's a really solid player. Not a whole lot of attention was given to him coming into this season because of all of the hype around other rookies such as Makar and Hughes and Jack Hughes and Capo Caco and even Ryan Poehling and Nick Suzuki and guys like that he kind of flew under the radar at the beginning of the season. And just, again, because I liked him, I picked up some of his stuff early on. I was able to get a Young Gun Clear Cut and a Young Gun High Gloss in the fall, I think in November and December, around then, for really, at the time, fair value. But then he just took off and became the player that, I think a lot of people really familiar with him thought that he could become. And really turned it on in the middle of the season and almost started scoring at like a goal a game type of pace for a while. And it came to the point leading up to the All-Star break where I realized, hey, these cards that I have, the Young Gun Clear Cut and especially the Young Gun High Gloss, these are probably worth substantially more money than what I got them for just a couple months ago. So at that point I said, well, what's it going to hurt to throw them out there and see what happens? Who knows what offers might come in. And so I did that, not really knowing what to expect. Just for context, I bought those 2 cards, like I said, in November and December, respectively, for a combined probably about $100 US, which, again, now if you hear those numbers and you say, wow, like that's a steal. But, at the time, that was fair money for them. And within probably, I don't know, a week or so of when I made the decision of moving them or potentially moving them, I had gotten, I think, around $600 in value for them, maybe a little bit more than that. So, it really does come down to the timing of it and just knowing, hey, this is probably a good time to get out of this guy's stuff right now. That was really his peak. His stuff is still selling very well. I don't know that it would be selling quite that well anymore, just because he did kind of cool off after the All-Star break. And then obviously with games not going on, his hype has kind of died down a little bit over time. But yeah, I mean, like we've said, the timing is everything, especially when it comes to if you have cards of guys that, have kind of come on the scene quickly. You really don't want to hang on to those cards for too long because, like I said, if you do, they could really just drop off in value again once, the hype around that player kind of dies down. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully we've given you a good glimpse of the investment world. It's really, really hard to get it right. For every investment that you make, there's probably going to be one that doesn't work out how you want it to, or doesn't work out as well as you hoped it might. So it definitely is a risk. And obviously, there are ways of doing it more safely than others. Like I said earlier, I think going after the key rookie cards of those bigger name guys is a good idea. I have kind of been making a point of accumulating young guns of the bigger name guys. Right now I've got 5 Austin Matthews. I've got 4 Patrick Laine's, which I think right now are a phenomenal buy. They're selling pretty cheaply. I mean, you can have them for $35-$40 US pretty much all day long, maybe 45. But if he ever gets back to scoring goals how he can, and if the Jets have team success and win a cup, I mean, his stuff could easily at least double in price, no problem. So he's a guy that I would say is a good speculative buy right now, as well as also kind of being a safer buy in the sense that I really don't think his stuff is going to go down at all from here. It could, but realistically, I don't see that happening. I think he's kind of at his floor right now. So I think he's a good buy. I think Jack Eichel is another good guy to get in on while you can. And unfortunately for him, he's kind of stuck on a bad team and in a bad organization right now.
Yeah, sorry, Buffalo fans.
As well as obviously just having been overshadowed by McDavid in the 15-16 rookie class. So his stuff has just never had that same high-end value that, it could have had if he was in a different rookie class. Even if he was in pretty much any other rookie class.
Anyone but McDavid.
Yeah, I mean, even 16-17, I think he would have had better value, even though you had the Maple Leaf trio and Line A. I think he probably would have had better value. But yeah, I think he's definitely a good guy to invest in. If the Sabres ever pull it together, or if he ends up going to a different organization, I think his stuff could definitely go up in value. So I think he's a good one to focus on. I do have a couple McDavid young guns, just one I pulled at the time of release, and I picked up another one for cheap a couple years ago. Which, again, that brings me to another point I meant to mention. To me, one of the best buys that you can get is going after the big-name young guns like a year or 2 after they're released. Because generally speaking, that's kind of the time period when those bigger names tend to dip a little bit in value. Some guys drop off a lot from the prices that they were at release, and some guys dip just a little bit, or maybe they've even actually gone up a little bit, but that, hey, this is a top level player and his staple rookie card, like the Young Guns, is only going to go up. So if you can kind of keep an eye on the Young Guns of top level players from release, and then once they dip a little bit after a year or two, and if they're still showing signs of becoming a superstar player down the road, I think that's a good way to go.
Definitely. Just speaking to your point that you spoke on earlier about picking up a couple cards that originally you didn't plan on selling, I think it's important to note that if you do happen to pick up cards of a player, not really from an investment standpoint, but just something that you enjoy picking up, and then just by pure dumb luck, they happen to be a great investment, and the player that you like does explode in value. I think another important note would be just knowing that, like, although it's hard, it's okay to sell those cards. Like, say if you have a Young Guns acetate, like a really rare, sought-after card of say, your favorite player, I think it's okay to sell them. Just knowing that traditionally, for the most amount of cards out there, you will be able to buy that card back for probably a lot lower than what you're selling it at now.
Yes.
If you're buying Kubalik, and again, his stuff did explode there for a bit, and say you really liked that particular rookie card or rookie card parallel, and then it got too high that you pretty much had to sell based on the current market, and then got a nice little payday. But although the prices might be high now, for a lot of the players out there, you can buy back your favorite cards just for your personal collection once they cool down a bit. The McDavids and the Matthews, it's probably a different story. But for those flash in the pan type players, if you can kind of, speculate and say, you know what, this player, although they're my favorite, probably won't make the Hall of Fame. I think it's a pretty safe bet to sell these key rookie cards, maybe even sell my entire collection, and then buy back the cards that I like the most at a cheaper price. I think it's definitely the best of both worlds if you want to talk about those short-term investments, but also ones on these cards that you do want and you do genuinely like. It's not about a money thing per se, although there is money involved. These are cards that we enjoy and that we should be able to hopefully pick them back up for our collections once that hype has kind of gone down and come back to earth a little bit. So just another piece of advice for any collectors out there wanting to invest who do happen to have a couple cards laying around that are worth a substantial bit of money. Don't be afraid to sell, because chances are you will be able to buy them back in the future, and you'll probably save some money in the process, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I would have no problem buying back a Kubalik clear cut Young Gun or high gloss Young Gun down the road. I actually do kind of keep an eye out for them and just kind of keep up with what they're valued at nowadays. Like I said, I wouldn't mind getting those back at some point. Funny enough, the high gloss card that I owned, the guy that I did the deal with actually ended up razzing it on Facebook. So just for the kick of it, I actually entered the razz, and I'm not a razz guy at all. That's the only razz I've ever entered. But I figured, hey, for $15, why not take a shot at getting my card back, right?
Why not? I mean, you do want the card. I think that's another key point thing to mention here. I mean, again, if you're going into the card market on a strictly investment basis, I think you might be a little bit disappointed. But I think if you go in there with a collector mindset about, hey, I'm going to collect cards I like, and if you do have that sort of investment savvy mindset as well on the side, I think that's a really good way to go about it. So you can still genuinely enjoy this hobby, because I've seen it a bunch of times where people go into it strictly to invest. And I think they get into the hockey card market, maybe coming in from a different sport, and they're pretty disappointed at what kind of goes on in our little neck of the woods here. So if you genuinely like collecting hockey cards, or you genuinely like the sport, and you do want to kind of get into this market, I think it's a very fun market to be a part of. But definitely go in there with a genuine, authentic view of this hobby and something you do want to participate in, and not just be strictly investment. While there's nothing wrong with that, I just feel like you just for peace of mind, I think you'll have a better time investing your money elsewhere, unless you are partial to cards and you do want to make a little extra money on the side. I think it can be a best of both worlds scenario, but definitely keep those expectations realistic and just have fun, collect first. And if your cards end up being worth something, great. If you want to learn a bit about investing along the way, great. But definitely try to go at it 50-50 from a collector versus investment standpoint in this hobby. That would be one piece of advice that I would like to give to those collectors out there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully this has been helpful, not only to you, Hayden, but to everyone else listening. There are generally some things that apply across the board depending on what kind of investing you're wanting to do, but a lot of it also just is kind of a case-by-case type of thing, with the era of cards that you're going after, the types of players that you're going after, the types of cards of those players you're going after, the budget that you have to work with, the risk reward factor, how much of a risk you're willing to take with those cards. It all factors in to the investment aspect of the hobby. So there is not, unfortunately, just an answer, because if there was, everyone would be doing it. So, yeah, but hopefully this has been enjoyable for you guys to listen to. It's not something that Aaron and I talk about a whole lot, even just between us or, with others in the hobby, but it obviously is an important topic and is something that especially feels relevant today, not only with just the boom in card prices over the last few months, but also with the sales of the McDavid and Crosby Cup rookies over the last couple of weeks. So then changing gears into our last segment for this episode, the 2019-20 SP product came out on Wednesday, June 24th. And for those who aren't familiar with the product, this is only its second year being around in its current configuration. It's basically just a retail version of SP Authentic. So a lot of the things within the product are very similar to SP Authentic. For example, the base cards, from as best as I can tell, I have not held an SP base card in my hand yet, but just looking at pictures of them, from the best I can tell, the only difference between the two cards is that the SP retail cards just say SP on the front instead of SP Authentic, and then on the back it says SP Hockey instead of SP Authentic Hockey. That's the only difference, and that's just as far as the base cards. Obviously, there are differences within the rest of the product. There are the Rookie Authentics rookie cards that are numbered out of 1,199. There are also Authentic Profiles insert cards, and there are blue parallels of the base rookies and insert cards as well, whereas SP Authentic, generally speaking, has the red parallels and, in the last few years, the black parallels as well. One really great thing about SP, which in my mind is really the highlight of the product, is that there are autograph and jersey versions of many of the cards as well. A lot of the rookies do have both jerseys and autographs in the product, and there are autographs and jerseys of veteran players as well throughout the product. So just looking at it in terms of a retail product standpoint, I think that the value offered by SP is by far the best out of any retail product that's out there. There are other products that you might be able to get a bigger dollar hit. For example, if you're opening 15-16 Upper Deck 1 retail, yeah, obviously you can hit a Connor McDavid Young Gun that's, now worth whatever, $300. But the odds of that, while still feasible, aren't, necessarily great. You're not going to get that big money card in every single retail pack or box or whatever of Upper Deck Series 1 or 2 or MVP or, insert whatever retail product that you want here. But with SP, as far as the configuration goes, it's 8 packs per blaster box with 5 cards per pack. And within that blaster box, you're guaranteed to get one quote unquote hit, which is either a serial numbered card, a memorabilia card, or an autograph card. So just looking at it from that standpoint, SP is the only retail product that guarantees you any of those things per box. Other products, you can get memorabilia cards, of course, but they're not guaranteed. So just looking at a consistent value approach, I think SP is second to none on the retail slate. And it also comes in hanger pack configuration as well, which I didn't mention. Again, it's 5 cards per pack, and the hangers are just 3 packs per hanger instead of the 8 packs that are in the blaster box. But yeah, I think SP is definitely one of the best, really the best retail product at this point each year. And I think it has definitely been really well received over the last couple of years by collectors. And in terms of if you are a new collector or a young collector and you're looking for a way to open product and really feel like you're getting your money's worth, I think that starting out with, a few blasters of SP is the way to go. You're going to get high quality cards, and you're going to get at least 1, if not 2 notable cards in each blaster. And, for the price point, which for a blaster is going to be in the 25 US, 30 Canadian range, somewhere in there, it's pretty much impossible to beat.
Yeah, definitely. Like I remember going back to last year when the product first, this retail product first jumped, it just kind of caught everyone off guard. Like, what is this product? Like, especially coming soon after, SPA, a very staple product in the hobby, and seeing this SP retail version to definitely caught people off guard. But as far as the value goes, yeah, it's definitely a good buy for those experienced collectors who definitely want a change of pace when it comes to their retail rips. I know a lot of people do stay away from retail because the value factor just isn't there. But for SP, I definitely think it's one that you're gonna hopefully get your money's worth. And then also, Eric, like you said, just the beginner collector. It's something that they can kind of get into and kind of dip their feet in, and it's not going to break the bank, but they're definitely going to get some cool cards out of it. So definitely very cool to see that come up for another year, and hopefully you see that on the shelves at your local Walmart pretty soon.
Yeah, and I mean, in addition, you can, end up just getting, a rookie jersey of, a fairly common name. But on the flip side, there really are some pretty big cards that can be had. Just looking at the checklist this year as far as rookie autographs goes, which, just for the record, rookie autographs in SP this year are 1 in 100 packs. So it's not even like they're super crazy hard to hit, whereas in other retail products, a really good chase card might be 1 in 1,000 packs or 2,500 packs or something. No, like SP, it's feasible to hit a really solid card. Looking at the rookie autograph cards, you can get autographs of Igor Shesterkin, Victor Olofsson, Dominic Kubalik, Cody Glass, Quinn Hughes. All those guys are just in the base rookie auto checklist. And then there's also a gold version of the rookie autograph cards, and those are numbered out of only 25. And that version actually has an expanded checklist that includes autographs like Zadina, Kirby Dach, Rasmus Sandin, see who else, Nick Suzuki, Jack Hughes, guys like that don't have just the base autos, actually have even rarer versions of the autograph in the product. So, I mean, those are definitely big time cards to be getting out of the product.
Definitely exciting stuff. You're ripping into some retail stuff right there. Definitely very cool. and hopefully our listeners will pull some great things out of them. Speaking about our listeners, we just want to pose a couple of questions for you, just seeing as how this episode was primarily about investing. We just want to know from you guys if you invest in hockey cards, and if so, what do you typically like to invest in? And how do you determine just what to invest in general? And if you don't invest, would you consider doing so in the future? I know it's kind of a risky thing, just investing in general, but it's something as, especially myself, being a collector for so many years, the investor side of it definitely creeps into your mind here and there, especially when you pick up a big card. So we'll be posting these questions on our various social media accounts. So definitely keep an eye out for that. If you want to follow us on social media, you definitely can at Center Ice CC on Twitter. You can also follow myself at Crease Collector on Twitter also. I'm also can be found on Instagram. If you want to give me a follow on that, I'll be sure to follow you back. And that's it for us today. So definitely thanks for tuning in, and just keep an eye out for those questions.
Yeah, so that'll wrap it up for episode 5 of Center Ice Cardcast. Like Aaron said, please be sure to follow us on social media. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Center Ice Cardcast, and like he said, on Twitter at Center Ice CC. Please also be sure to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice to make sure you never miss a future episode. Until next time on Center Ice Cardcast, keep collecting those hockey cards.